Zayas. This is a presentation for the final project for CPSC 6119, Spring 2017 online course for Dr. Juan. This is the final requirement for the class. Final project, we need to do a presentation, and this is what I'll do right now. So here's the outline. The first thing I'll go through quickly is the use case, and I have it open right here. So the use case, so here are the users, the bishop and the mission leader. So a bishop is it's the religious leader within an LDS church area, which we call wards or branches. And mission leaders are people or individuals that help out the bishop in the services within the local area. So here are the functions that they can do in this system. They can do CRUD functionality for users. CRUD, as we know, it means create, read, update, and delete. So these users can do these functions, and also they can receive baptism notifications. When an investigator, which is a person that is learning about the church, when they decide to be baptized, then the system will notify the bishop or the mission leader, or both. And also the bishop and the mission leader can see reports about the progress of investigators, to see how many lessons they've had and whether they are ready to be baptized, if they have chosen to do so, etc. And also they can see reports about the progress of new members or converts. So new members are investigators which have been baptized, and we call them new members or converts. And here also we have the missionaries, which are individuals who serve for 18 months to 24 months in a local area, proselyting to try to help people come onto Christ, and they help out those also with the bishop and the mission leader within the local area. So they can create investigators, create, read, update, and delete, as well as the preferences for those investigators. The contacted preferences means whether the investigators want to be contacted by email, text, phone, etc., to learn more about the church, to actually set up an appointment so that missionaries can go to their houses and share what they know about the church. And lastly, one of the functions is also to create a investigator's checklist, which is basically, it's a mean to know the progress of people that are learning more about the church. And also likewise, we have a checklist for new members to see the progress of people that have actually converted into the church, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So as you can see, all that is scoped within a system. It's a C# class library, and that's the name of the project, our Z-Term project, CPSC 6119. That's just the name of the solution within Visual Studio. And it's a backend code only, so we have no GUI, but we'll test it out through a unit test. It's a class that has a lot of methods that are simulating all this functionality. And the plan is so that in the future, the actual front end can be built and can be hooked up into this business logic. Here we have another system that is outside of the scope of this, but we're kind of simulating that. It's a replication process to get data from Select City, which has a list of investigators or of people that have called into a call center and that they're inquiring more about the church. So they send that data to the local area, in my case, in Orlando, Florida. So we're going to simulate that by executing a C# method that runs a SQL file and loads that data into a SQL Server database. And we'll show that as we go through this presentation. So that's the use case diagram here. The second thing was the class diagram, and for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'll show you the class diagram. So we divided the class diagram into three just to be more readable. So here's the business logic and repository classes that are used within the project that I created. And like I said, I'm not going to go into the details, but suffice to say that this is the business logic of the project, and the DAO or the repository classes. So here also we're using a singleton. So all this is a class diagram. It's pointing to itself because there's just one instance of it. This is just used for the database settings. And we have an enumeration for some report types and a report manager class. Then we have the model classes, which is actually what we use to store the information. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but that's the class diagram for the models. So this, in essence, this classes will be used to map. So it's the object or object relational mapping that will create the actual tables. It's at the interfaces, all of the other ones like person and user type. This will in essence translate to a table in SQL Server, which is the relational database system that we're using for this project. And then lastly, here in the UML, this is the unit class that contains all the test methods and the simulation to load data from Salt Lake City, which in our case is just a SQL file. So in this class, like I say here, it has a composition relationship, which is not shown because of space issues. But each, this class, it's basically, it has a composition relationship. It has with all the non-primitive types that are showing up here, all the actual classes like person detail, person type, all that. So it has a relationship or a composition relationship. So that's it for the first two items, the use case and the class diagram. Now I created a system manual, so I'll go through it as time permits. So the group members is just myself. So I just listed my name there. The problem statement, I'm not going to read all of this, but basically, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is create an automation of the different steps that individuals, like investigators or people that don't know about the church, and the people that actually join the church, so that we can keep track of their progress. And right now, most of the systems, they are doing it within a paper flow base. Some of these things they actually have automated, but some they don't. So my quest was just to create something that can serve as a guideline to automate that process as much as possible. So that's the essence of the problem statement, that we want to basically create some checklists for investigators or new members. We want to create some reports for the leaders so that they can know that progress, and set up some notifications for the leaders when a person decides to be baptized into the LDS Church or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The users and stakeholders, like I mentioned in the use case, we have the bishop, mission leader, the missionaries. And the scope, basically we are gonna simulate, like we explained here, that there's a database where we get information from. So that's this replication process, and where we get all the investigator information from Salt Lake into our local database. And within the scope of this project, here are the things that are actually done. So we create a local SQL Server database called Term Project using SQL Express. We use the entity framework to access the database. The entity framework, it's an ORM or object relational mapping technology that it allows us to save data from objects into a relational database. So we create 10 tables, which I'll show in a minute. And also we have all the crop functionalities that I mentioned in the use case, the reports about the investigators and the newcomers, and notifications that are sent to the bishop and mission leader when an investigator decides to be baptized. So the idea is that this project, like I mentioned in the use case, it's just a backend project. It's a C# library, a DLL, and that's the scope of this project. But the idea is that in a future term, the actual GUI can be created and be hooked up into this backend logic. So here are all the test methods that I created to create user, read user, and all those. If we go back here to the project, so there's one class called unit test term project under the unit test project. So we have all those test methods that actually do all the CRUD operations and the notifications and so on and so forth. So that's what the test methods mean. So, each method has a specific purpose, and we can tell by the actual name, what it's doing, create user or read a user and so on and so forth. And the logic to simulate this replication process is actually done in this load data generic online call center data entry. And all that does is reading a SQL file that I have here, this data generic online, and it reads it and it dumps it into the SQL Server database that I'll show in a minute. After all the data is populated, we create reports, tests in text files, and I'll show how those look after I run through the simulation. So that's basically it. This is the heart of the project, really. All those test methods that are doing all the complicated business logic, or is actually calling the business logic. And this is the schema. I'm not going to go into the details of each column, but we have a users table, a users types table, people table. We have person details, person types, messages table, message details, message type, investigator checklist table, and newcomer checklist table. Okay, so that's where we store all the information. The design patterns that I use three main ones that were used in the scope of the course. One of them is the abstract factory. I list where it was used in the namespace that can be found in the project. That's the interface. And I use that because we're creating messages or related classes. So I encapsulate them within an abstract factory to hide the implementation of how it's actually created. So I use that in the message factory and person factory. And why I use it, because I explain it right here, just to create a family of related objects without specifying their concrete classes. And per the textbook, that helps encapsulate object creation and leads to a more decoupled, flexible design. The second pattern that I use is a singleton pattern. This is how I used it, and where I use in the unit test class. And why I used it, because we only need to get one instance of the database settings. And I use approach number 2, page 181, which is the eager approach, which basically means that we create this once. Since we will always need at least one, well, not at least, but just one instance of this class. So that's why it's a singleton. And the third pattern that I use is this strategy. So here's an example of how I use it in the code and where I use it. That's the test method that uses the pattern. The reason why I use it is because, as you can see, the notification context, we want to swap out implementations on the fly or at runtime, whether it's email, text, etc. So I have another class called text notification strategy. The actual implementation of sending the email or text is not there. That's outside of the scope, but the main idea is to actually use the pattern like that so that we can add the actual implementation and change it as needed. Okay, so instructions to run the program. The software needed, we need Visual Studio 2015. I used Enterprise, but we can use, in theory, we should be able to use any version of 2015 for Visual Studio. I wrote the code in C#, and the SQL Server Express 2012. So those are the two software packages I utilized. And to run the program, the app config, it doesn't need to be modified, but if you would like to use a different database name, just change the initial catalog name here, something else. In our case, our database is called Term Project. Okay, so we'll go ahead and run it to see how it looks. So first, I'll show you that the database does not exist in SQL Server Management Studio. So right here, there's not a term project. This one is just something that I was playing with, but it's not part of this course. So once I run through the simulation, it's going to create the term project database, which right now it doesn't exist. And I'll refresh just to make sure. Close it. Go back to Visual Studio to run it. And all the steps are in the manual. So we'll go to Test Explorer. We'll right-click the test methods, or the test class that has all the test methods and the sequence that they need to be run. And I'll just run them. It's running right now. We see the green bar there, which tells us that it's still running. You should finish in about here. It just takes seconds. It ran in 12 seconds. It finished, as we can see here at the bottom. So now if we go back to SQL Server, I'm going to launch it, log into it, Windows Authentication. Now we can see the term project database and the 10 tables. Well, there's 11 if we count the migration history. That's something for the entity framework. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not going to go through the data here since I listed that in the document. So here, once we run it, that's the steps that I show you. It's going to drop and recreate the database if it exists, and it's going to populate the data, the database with CRUD operations, like in the use case, and the simulation of the data from the SQL file, and it's going to create reports. So the simulation we run, there are 34 test methods. So you should be able to see that successfully. Then browse the data. So I have instructions here on how to do that. Those are the tables that I just showed. And then I specify the count of each table of how many rows should be in there. So for time purposes, I'm not gonna go through all those, but that's the data that it's created. And then the last thing that the simulation does is that it creates these two reports in the area in the folder where the solution is. So we got created a couple of minutes ago. So these are reports about how investigators are doing that the bishop can see. So we can open up with Notepad to see the formatting nicely. Oops. So here's the header. Then the first row, the second row has the columns, and then the data and the progress of the investigator. Likewise, we have a report for the newcomers, which we can open up Notepad. It's just a text file. That's the report name. The second row is the columns, and the data it's in the other rows with the progress of new members. Okay, and the location of those can be changed. So if you go to the app config and change the settings, I just have it to set up to my C code where I just show you where the report was. But if you want to specify to some other place, that can be done here before running the simulation. I believe that's it in the manual. Okay, last thing, there is a glossary that has some of the terms that I used as I was doing this presentation, like active or convert or investigator, and so on and so forth. So you can see some of those in this website to understand more about the domain that I was working on. Okay, well, this concludes the presentation for the final project for CPSC Season 119, Spring 2017. For Dr. 1, my name is Ralph Zayas. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.